Faith in the Fresh Vibe podcast. My name is Rohadi, coming at you from Treaty 7 Lands. Ladies and gentlemen, Season 2 is upon you. Season 2 of the Faith in the Fresh Vibe podcast. Thanks for tuning in. You're going to notice that all of our episodes are available at once a la Netflix. In this season, we have Tony Snow. He returns to continue a conversation about Indigenous spirituality. We're also going to share some history around this region on Treaty 7 lands. You want to pull both of those episodes out. I have two other guests in this season. The Tony interviews were recorded last year, and my other two guests, Deb and Moneta, they were recorded this year in June and July. That's important because that's smack dab in the pandemic world that we live in, and also in the middle of the anti-racist protests. So I'm excited to share with you this season. I hope you find some gems, that you share it widely. I'm also excited for next season. To get ahead of myself, Season 3 is going to center the anti-racist movement. We're going to pull in so many different voices. I think I'm going to try to pull in voices from the Decolonizing Christianity Canada group that is emerging in Canada. In the meantime, this episode, Deb launches us off in Season 2. We're going to talk about her background in policy, how policy making can be used to enact change in society. Deb is, well, she has wisdom beyond her years. She's building space for leaders of color on the board of some organizations, holding space for leaders of color. She just launched a magazine centering Black authors and writers. Her background is in policymaking and communications, where she has focused in the past on immigration and refugee protection, and is now stretching beyond that in her work, sticking with public policy and stretching beyond. We're going to chat in this episode about policymaking, about reimagining neighborhoods and what safe neighborhoods look like. We're going to talk about what does safe neighborhoods look like for neighborhoods of color or people of color. What does it mean to reimagine our city, our neighborhoods in light of new public protesting around the call against anti-Blackness? What it means to become anti-racist. We're going to have all sorts of different conversations on identity, defunding the police, why that may not be a good idea. All that packed together in this 40-plus minute episode. So I didn't cut it into two. You can pause it if you need a break and process some of these ideas. I hope you find some gems. But we're going to go straight into our conversation about identity, public policy, and reimagining our city, neighborhoods, and beyond.
So my Nigerian name, which is from my tribe, which is the Yoruba tribe, is Oluwafumilaya, and it means God has given me joy. And most Nigerians that you'll meet will have a name that's a sentence, and it's probably a name that's a sentence about God.
Let's go back to the top, because we were chatting about names and our funny names. And it's like, wait a minute, why are these names funny? They're my name, and it's our identity. And so how did, we were just chatting off air about your three names and how they kind of came into this country and its format, or share with us.
Yeah, so I guess like in Nigeria, you can just sort of, not like change your names, but the order of your first and middle, and everyone has at least like, so when a baby is born, there's a naming ceremony. And so every member of your family gives you a name. So everyone has like 10 names minimum. You don't know them all, and throughout your life, like you forget them. But like the family member that gave you that name, like the auntie that named you something, is going to refer to you as that and not whatever your name your parents gave you. So it's just sort of a thing. So we moved to the country, and my parents were going to keep the names that they gave me, which is my middle name and my like Hebrew Jewish name, I guess, which is Deborah. And so we moved, and they just sort of put like my Nigerian name first and didn't think anything of it. And now it's like followed me on my social insurance number and my passport and every documentation, because it really matters like what's your first and what's your middle here.
Did that mess you up in school?
Thankfully, like in the CBE system, you just like can say which name you want to be referred to. So it was never, my teachers never like would have seen it on their attendance. But sure enough, they messed up my last name all the time, so it's fine.
How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Mebude. So every E, there's 2 E sounds in the Yoruba alphabet. So it's different than the way that we use the E, and people can't figure it out. It's not their fault.
You need to have some ethnic grounding and history. The first language in Nigeria is
English.
It's English, and so when people are like, oh, what's your English name? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, I have, and so you don't have a backup name. You just have this rich ethnicity behind you of different of the naming ceremony and all the different pieces that comes together. Mm-hmm. No backup plan. My parents gave me backup plan.
What's your backup?
My backup is Barry.
Like Barack?
Yeah. Straight up like, well, now it's like Barack. Believe me, growing up, it was not like Barack. Who is Barack? That's dope. I've never heard someone say like Barack. I'm feeling Barry now.
Presidential.
I'm feeling so presidential suddenly.
Can I say something funny quickly? I don't know if you guys were on Twitter earlier, but it's Trump's birthday today.
Oh, okay. You're dating the podcast.
Well, that's okay. But just for the sake of saying it, it's his birthday, so everyone's saying all birthdays matter. There's a really trending hashtag.
Yeah.
And I really like it. And then they're also using the opportunity to say, like, this is the first Obama day. Like, we're going to mark this day for Barack instead.
Yeah, that's Barry.
The connection to Barry.
For B. We're Twitter buddies.
I like Twitter.
I could message Barry right now. We could be 2 berries in a pod.
He follows you? Is that what you're saying?
Well, but I follow him. I think is the bigger.
No, that's not the headline. Oh. That's a big deal.
Well, I think it was just huge when the Democrats are first coming into power, and I was a big Barry fan, and so I guess they like that. Unless it's him, do you think? I mean, it's definitely Trump on his account.
Yeah.
Barry. Yeah. So my parents gave me a backup name, but I never really used it. And sometimes in business, I've used it just as a mechanism to help white people hire me.
Do you get a better reception with that name?
For if it's just because a lot of my work is online in marketing, and so having Barry makes things more accessible. I've dropped that since. I still have a number of my emails in business are connected, so some people just think I have a brother. But yeah, I try to now as a form of not protest, but to double down and tell people my full name. I don't let them get away with Ro. I'll say, my close friends call me Ro Hattie, but you can call me Ro. And that's a new pot shot to people. So
people
names
I like
matter.
Call me Ro Hattie, but everyone I hate calls me Ro.
No, don't say
leave
like
it
that.
there.
That's subtle protests. Speaking of protests, we're just in the midst right now. Again, we date this podcast, but it'll come out at a different time. We're on Treaty 7 lands. We're in Calgary, and we were talking just after the George Floyd, which is it was a symbol. He is a symbol more than that, but the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back and the symbol that let out all this pent-up rage and sadness and everything connected to protests. And we were remarking right around it broke in Minneapolis. We were saying protest in a group chat. Yeah, I'm not really feeling protests. I don't really comprehend. And this is our context in our city. Mm-hmm. Calgary doesn't protest. So like, what's the point? And you made a remark that, in Ottawa, it made sense. You go up onto the hill and you protest and there's a higher chance of being seen and making some noise. But in Calgary, it's like, when was the last protest that was idle? No. That wasn't that big. Occupy, a bunch of progressive and unemployed white kids were camping out in Olympic Plaza.
It was confusing a little bit.
Yeah, and so you remember that conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then we were blown away.
Yeah, I stood very corrected. It was surprising. And like I said, in Ottawa,
Totally surprised.
it's not even just going to the Hill, because the Hill's there, but it's also like every embassy to every country, with the exception of a few. So like you can always, if there's something going on in like Saudi, you go to the Saudi embassy and you like stand outside, or something goes on in the US, you're like, let's go be mad at Trump. And so there was just such a protest culture. Like there was always a protest, and people would actually show up, and there would actually be sort of like a statement made. And so I just didn't think that Calgary did that or had that same capacity or interest.
Yeah.
But I think it's all Gen Z. Those folks are...
You think it's a Gen Z thing?
They are out in the streets. I think they were also bored from coronavirus lockup on some level, but very legitimately, there were so many... It was young people in particular, but also other ages that seemed to really take this seriously in Calgary, and I was surprised.
I was surprised too, because, and I'm not, the oldest. Maybe we'll have our fact checker check up with the years of Gen Z. I know the official answer, but yeah, you said culture. We do not have a culture in Oil Town, which is affectionately known as like the Houston or the Texas of Canada. Mm-hmm. Now it's kind of turning into the Florida of Canada. Ooh. Without the great weather. Mm-hmm. We do not protest. We're a bunch of oil barons. We have a lot of money, and we don't rock the boat. And then suddenly, thousands of people were clogging the streets, taking over bridges. And I've never seen anything like that in my life. Mm-hmm. Here.
It was remarkable. Like, I don't know what the numbers were. I'm sure some journalists sort of had an estimate. But it was clear that it was way more than we've ever had. And it was 3 events in a single week that all had record numbers. It was surprising. It was like, okay, the first one had a lot of people,
maybe it was
a fluke.
Yeah.
It was nice weather. And then Wednesday, same thing. And then the Saturday, same thing. And I was like,
Wednesday was huge. I don't know how big Saturday was compared to Wednesday.
Still pretty big.
But Wednesday they were shutting down downtown.
Yeah.
And this is just not something that Canada doesn't really do it, although in Toronto you might see that a little bit more. In
Quebec
Montreal, of
has
course.
A culture,
yeah. This is that French thing, I guess.
Yeah.
And Calgary does not. Mm-hmm. It's just like tumbleweeds of the prairies, but a million people happy to just make their money. Gen Z should be 85 up to 2004. I know some people just go by the years. What does the fact checker say? Mid to late 1990s for Gen Z. So millennials go to 80. Oh, so millennials are 85 to 2000. I've heard
so many different demographic breakdowns with that. Like,
it's supposed to be generations.
It is. But what I've heard most recently around millennials is like it ends around 97. And then it's sort of like the people that were born in 2000 and like onwards are the Gen Z. Like the idea is that millennials come of age in the new millennium. But like, I don't know. I'm born in 95. Like I was 5 in the new millennium. I don't feel like I came of age at that point. But in most times I hear about millennials, I'm looped in with that as like one of the later millennials.
You're a later millennial. Whereas I guess I'm a purist, and it's supposed to be generational, because I've always been told, you're an early millennial. But if you go by generations, which is 20 years, and they start after the end of World War II, right? That means our boomer generation ends around 64, 65, and then Gen X up until 84? 85. Yeah, so that would put me as a late Gen Xer, which makes way more sense because I feel like an old soul in this body that is into neon fanny packs. And well, I guess that's the 90s.
That's come back somehow.
And that's the millennials. And then so Gen Z, so you would say that they were younger than you?
Here's why I say that. It's based mainly on a friend of mine who told me that it was her younger siblings and like all of their friends that were there. I didn't attend, and that's because of all kinds of reasons, including family members that are sick in my home. But from what I saw, there were a lot of like high school aged, new university, which I think is normally who leads movements, like historically.
Something like this, yeah.
It's like the young
protests.
people.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising. But I do think that there was also a good number of people that are older. I think the fact that lots of people are home from work meant that way more people could be there.
That was a factor for sure. Definitely younger. But I feel that there has been a inswelling of response, of momentum across the board, particularly in the church as well. That's where I pay attention to, and then social media to some degree. There's something shifted. Something has shifted. Have you felt that?
Yes. And maybe you want to go into this later because I've also felt the opposite shift. I've had to delete a good number of people from my old church who have just been overly vocal on the internet about how systemic racism is a fake thing and how
white people,
it's unfair that people are out there protesting and we can't go back to church. And how are we being sheep, being led to just join the crowd and protest this thing that doesn't exist? And they're not racist, therefore racism isn't a thing. So that's the element of the church that I've been very disappointed by. I think I've actually been more disappointed by the church. I don't know. There's been obviously some great showings from a lot of churches, but I think there's also been this like desire to believe that this isn't a problem. And even like if you believe this is a problem, it's like an affront to Christianity on some level. I don't understand it, but that's really something that I've perceived.
You've seen a lot of that in your, because maybe I've just curated my social media enough that
I'm starting to. Like last week I was like, these are people I'm going to delete now, and they're helping me know that they disagree with me and my existence on some level.
So here's the cultural exercise that Canada, US as well, we've been culturally shaped to know and believe that racist acts are wrong. Are wrong because we have reduced racism as merely the single actor. So the one dude's, spraying a swastika on a synagogue or saying the N-word. And so long as we don't do those single actions, racism doesn't exist. And if I'm not a racist and doing those things, then racism as a whole doesn't exist. If you're a white person or someone working really hard to assimilate, then it all makes sense for you because you have managed to not merely assimilate yourself, but you are matching the dominant, which is in this country, white male gaze. And so everything looks normal. And you're intentionally trying to dismantle and reject the stories of your black and brown brothers and sisters. You don't even want to listen to those of injustice in our midst. And I feel like this momentum has shifted. Now, I don't know how many white people know what they want to do, and culturally we're not prepared or able to handle grief and sorrow. We want to internalize and individualize all those pieces. But I just have this encouragement that at least something has shifted, that white folks and the dominant narrative is cracking.
For sure. Yeah. So something was totally different last week. I was joking with a group of, not even like individual black friends I was just chatting with last week about how like so many white people were being so nice and like apologetic and like just like in
Were they
weird
giving you money?
Uncalled for ways like a friend of mine was driving and got to a complete stop kind of thing, and there's a driver who was like upset with him and then saw him and that he was, and then like assuming that maybe in another week this could have happened, but all of a sudden was like, oh no, you go ahead, like just like overly
well, they gotta do
kind.
their thing,
Yeah. And the amount of messages I got last week,
did you get "Are you okays" from a lot of
lots
people?
of that, and I really appreciated it. It was amazing, but it was like this has never happened before. Like, and there's been plenty of people in the news who have died who are black by police brutality or otherwise. And this is the first time that I'm seeing like multiple sort of like people reaching out, and even like the trolls on my Twitter were like being they were being nice, but they were being
trolly.
like careful, and like I found them really funny. Like one person had said, well, I am more disturbed by the traffic on 10th Street Bridge than I have ever been by racism. So I don't really feel like this is the thing. Like even that, you're obviously being a troll and dumb, but like you're being hilarious about it. So yeah, anyways, last week just seemed really interesting, but I think it was really a moment where people were feeling like it became a bit more of a collective societal problem than just like the individual communities that are affected. And all of a sudden, I don't know, there was just like allyship from every direction. And even people that I remember seeing a thread from, this is someone I don't know, but like, she calls herself a Karen. Like she's a middle-aged mom from like the Bible Belt kind of thing. And she was saying how like in the course of a week, just from reading, she's all of a sudden now like on the political opinion of like defunding the police, and basically laid out like a 30-part thread about why defunding the police is going to be good for people and why the policing system is built to basically like oppress certain marginalized communities. And anyways, there's just like a lot of people listening and changing their minds about things, which you don't normally see like that quickly. Journalists were all of a sudden covering different sorts of ideas. There was obviously like the Rex Murphys and the Stockwell Days that are always vocal,
the old stock.
Yeah, but there was this other like sort of radical opposite point where the CBC is discussing like, how do we defund the police? Which is a conversation that the week prior they weren't going to even have.
Yeah, they're changing so fast, even in the language that they're using.
Yeah.
In the, is it Canadian press, I think, now switched, and just this past week, you're going to capitalize black.
Yeah. And it's so cool.
Like, really?
And things that people have been asking for a long time are all of a sudden, it's like, oh, our demands are being met. And so I was seeing really funny things like just friends taking advantage of people's generosity and being like, if you really want to support Black Lives Matter, like, support a Black woman, like send her an e-transfer today. Or like there was a really funny comedian who, I don't know if you guys saw this, the fedora thing. Last week it was Fedoras for Freedom. He was like, thank you to all the whites out there for, you know, your support this week. But if you really want to help Black people, we're asking you to wear fedoras tomorrow and hashtag fedoras for freedom. And the hashtag
somebody did.
Is amazing. So many people. And I think some of them thought it was a joke, or some of them knew it was a joke, but some of them were totally well-meaning. And like, the Blacks have asked us to do this. Like, we're standing in solidarity. Here's my fedora. Oh, it's amazing.
I don't know where
people were very willing to just like jump in and help. And I think that was really new.
The sustainability of this is my question. It's all of our question. Is this sustainable? Because I'll tell you what, it's all nice on social media. Tomorrow, that doesn't matter because the podcast will come.
Whatever.
Don't let Black Lives Matter hashtag become the next Coney 2012.
Ooh.
Because right now we're in the midst where y'all don't know what's going to happen after all this social media stuff dies down, because if you actually put in the work, you're going to lose your privilege. And when that happens, we'll see who's still around.
Mm-hmm. I think there'll be a remnant, and that's like all we can ask for.
I agree.
Because it won't be everyone. It can never be.
You don't know the loss. What's the, and I had that in my book, but I could never find, and I'm not sure if there is a known author to it, but equality to the privilege looks like oppression. Mm-hmm. If you're going to lose your privilege, man, that looks like you are losing something. Mm-hmm. That's traumatic.
Yeah. I was at Sarisha's house. I'll just name drop her because why not?
Sarisha, and so just to give her a quick plug on what she's doing for women of color, is it?
It's like youth of color in Canada.
Youth of color in public policy, is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, what's the org called?
Leading in Color.
Leading in Color. Name drop. Cha-ching. We'll put in a sound effect there.
But this is a bit of a side story, but it was a group of friends for her housewarming. There was like 30 of us, all from her church, and it was a really diverse
white church, wasn't it?
Her church was white, but for some reason their young adults is very like diverse. So there's like Asian people, like, you know, South Americans, lots of people from across the African continent, like it's a pretty good subsection of folks. But there was like one white guy, and at some point during our conversation, we were playing a game. It was one of those like I think the question was something like bad career advice, or like the worst advice you can give to someone looking for a job. And his like smart response was identify as a white man. And he then like, and then when he said it, I was like, read the room, my dude. You're really outnumbered. But then he went on to say like, as a white man, as a result of like affirmative action, he's lost jobs and not been able to get into certain spaces and blah, blah, blah. And was sort of like whining and asking for our empathy as like all immigrants.
Yeah. And then like the record needle came off.
Yeah. But he did raise a semi-legitimate, you know,
don't
offensive point, which is that if you are going to make spaces for other people, then maybe some people that are normally in the sort of privileged position are going to lose some of their ground. I still firmly believe he has a way more access than I will probably have in my lifetime. But he doesn't know that necessarily. But what he sees is that like there are certain doors that are close to him. When for us, it's like, oh, finally there's doors that are open. But all he can see is like what he's lost.
You know who the number one benefactor of affirmative action was?
Isn't it white women?
White women.
Yeah. I should have told them that.
White women. Yeah. And they never brought in people who were unqualified.
And you still have to, like, the people that are getting into those positions are still having to meet the criteria. Like, it's not like we're now just bringing in, like, the Asian guy who's, like, 50% good, but then he's 100% Asian, so we're good to go. It's like, no, he still has to, like, meet the criteria.
Good at math and piano.
Check.
I can make that joke. I mean, not without its criticisms, of course, which sort of segues us into policy action. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about systemic racism, which is hot now. Everybody on systemic racism, because some people just heard about this word and other people are just like, yeah, doesn't exist, Rex Murphy, hashtag.
I feel like it's so indicative, or just like, it is a result of our very individualist culture. Like, people have a total misunderstanding of even a system, like the concept of a system, or something being like things working together, or there being any sort of collective. Like, because that idea is so divorced from like capitalism and all the other things, people cannot they cannot understand, how could there be systemic racism? Like, systems don't even exist. Everyone's an individual. My actions happen in a vacuum. Things that happen to you are like one-off.
Nothing's connected to
and
the
we're
past.
not going to draw any conclusions. Yeah, because why? This doesn't relate. This is
a good person.
Isolated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a total lack of understanding of history, but it also is indicative you're incapable, or right now have been incapable of seeing systemic elements at work at society that seek to denigrate black and brown skin and indigenous skin. In this country.
I think it's also, like, if I can just speculate my theories, like so as a black person, like, I represent Black People Incorporated, trademarked. But I feel like so many white people get to be individuals. And so, like, their action is just theirs. But, like, if some, I don't know, when I went in junior high, there's one other black guy in my whole grade, and, like, he smoked cigarettes in the upstairs bathroom, it was like, ooh, black people are smoking. But, like, if the white guy that he smoked with wasn't, like, smoking for all white people in the school. So I think there's even that piece where it's like, that cop did that thing, but he's just, like, that one cop.
Yeah.
And
here
really,
I am as a
he's
different
just,
one. You know, he's being a good policeman.
Yeah, but, like, you guys had the same training, which is that not some sort of a form of, like, a systemic education that happened together collectively? I don't know. It's weird to me.
What disturbs me about the policing, and, you know, I had to walk a tightrope on this, but the reality is we don't collect race-based stats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you would find out immediately, and this is part of Desmond Cole's book, you would find out immediately, hashtag, that people of color are carded, street checks, at a astronomically higher percentage.
Yeah.
But if that's not a problem, then start collecting the stats. Start collecting the stats, because when we see policing in Calgary and Edmonton specifically, which are still the cities predominantly white, Toronto is not, and Toronto's facing some serious problems around anti-Blackness in the police force. Now, perhaps that's a totally different police force, but systemically and institutionally, this is what happens when white institutions are faced with a populace that is no longer white, and they're fighting to cling for survival. And in this case, they're responding with violence. Defund the police is I haven't spent a lot of time analyzing that one in a Canadian context. How would you even do that policy-wise?
Yeah. And I should, like, start disclaiming, I guess, that I'm not a defund the police, like, advocate personally. I definitely believe in, like, huge reform. And I know a lot of the argument behind defunding the police is that, like, we've tried reform for all this time and nothing's really changed.
Or we talked about it.
Yeah. My mind is really like, let us reallocate money in a lot of ways. So one of the main ideas behind sort of, I don't want to call it a movement, and it's also not a new idea. Like, it's been talked about since, like, the Black Power movement. Black Panthers were talking about it. People like Angela Davis have been talking about it for decades. But obviously in the newest sort of iterations, and as it's being talked about now, it's ideas like, rather than a first responder, who is a police officer in most cases, and is often called for things like mental health crises. Someone's having like a episode of some kind, or they're dealing with something. They're trained not to de-escalate, but really just to, like, to contain someone or to like get them to stop. So they're going to tase someone, they're going to shoot someone. They'll do what they need to do if they feel like someone is being violent or if they feel like they're being attacked or their safety is going to be sort of compromised. So rather than having like police be the first people that come, how about you have people that are actually like trained in de-escalation, like a social worker or a nurse or someone who's like, or even I saw something really funny around like just bring in moms. Like they're so good at de-escalating their toddlers like every day. So people who their first thought is not like, let me shoot, like they're not trained to go for a gun. They don't even have a gun. Like their job is to deal with this thing and to help this person who's dealing with something. So that's part of it is like, let us, I mean, some of the defunding the police is, the whole policy is all of the money that goes towards the police department goes towards like community safety precautions. The idea being like, we don't need policing so much as we need like safety. Like that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And like police in a lot of communities of color do not provide safety. So what can do that better? So yeah, it's ideas of sort of like a community patrol, sort of like police officers being peace officers instead. Those are some of the ideas. Even ideas around like the amount of money, and I heard this in the Toronto context, that goes towards policing transit riding violations. So people that go on the TTC and don't pay. All the police officers that are doing that, why don't you just make transit free? And then there's no need to police it because everyone can just get where they need to get. And because policing in that scenario is so often just targeting poor folks that are trying to do stuff and like live their life and get around. And so it's ideas like that, just like how do we creatively take our massive police budgets? Like in Calgary in 2019, the budget was about $400 million. So $400 per Calgarian. How can we like slash that money totally or just use it in ways that are actually solving the problems rather than continuing
to police.
Yeah.
So that's about, and if last I looked at the stats, it was something like 15% of the total budget.
Which is not as big as in other cities, but it's still significant.
Yeah. And I'm just a thought came across my mind as you're talking about walking with a gun or a taser. I was like, I'm curious to know what anti-Blackness looks like in the police force in Britain, because they have certainly different training. But I don't think this is something that is solved by better training. It's certainly a reorientation, or rather a reimagination of what our neighborhoods look like. Because the reason why our police budget is so high is because the Karens in the suburbs are saying we need safe neighborhoods. That's why police budgets aren't touched. We need safe neighborhoods from gangs and drugs and black people and drunk Indians, because those are the only Indians we know. It needs a total reimagination, of which I don't know if we have that imagination. I mean, we have little pieces of it.
Yeah.
But we don't even know what that looks like. To even say defund police to what? We have no idea.
There is a complete lack of imagination. If there's anything that is learned from like, I don't know, watching policymakers or just politicians in general, like in a lot of scenarios, it's like you can't even conceive of a way to do this. I think of Alberta, I'll just quickly shout out our like lack of imagination around like diversifying the economy. It's like, how could we exist without oil? That doesn't make sense. Oil is oil.
We'll just switch to natural gas.
What? Like, yeah, there's just no sort of concept of like solar or wind or all the other things that like we can retrain people to do. So I think there is a lack of imagination. But I do think people are sort of, I don't know, if you can shape the arguments and the policy recommendations in a way that sort of appeals to people and makes sense, and isn't too like threatening, I think we can definitely, I think some creative things will come out of this time. But it requires though people to acknowledge the problems, and I think if we're still getting caught on the conversation around systemic racism, like we can't get there.
Yeah, we're just starting on the problems. I think part of the issue with public policy, I'm going to ask you this question, I'll give you a second to process it, that what would be a public policy shift in order for us to reimagine neighborhoods in a different way? But I think part of the problem is certainly connected to the fact public policy makers are also white. And those with the power have either inherited that power or they have the wealth in order to enact public policy changes. Nonprofits, NGOs are predominantly white. Government, of course, is staffers. So there's even that institutional bias within the mechanism, the potential mechanism to change. What is a public policy shift that could happen to reimagine neighborhoods? I wouldn't just say safe neighborhoods. I think it's reimagine healthy neighborhoods.
Yeah. I don't know that I fully have the answer for that. I've been listening to a lot of different voices, and even to bring back the defund the police sort of ideas, even there isn't like a fulsome, from what I've heard, strategy of like, this is what it will look like. This is who will do these things. This is how we now operate and move forward without police. I think on some level there's disagreement, but I think there's also like a challenge to sort of think of it because we're so tied and connected to and familiar with police. And maybe this is like super theological, but I don't believe that we will have like safety in this world. Like, I don't know that that's possible fully anyways. Like, I just believe that sin is really a thing, and like principalities and all these things. Like, I believe that racism is like a huge principle. Like, there's a lot that's just connected to the brokenness of this world. So I'm a little bit less idealistic that like getting rid of police will solve all the problems, but I think definitely reimagining police will do so. Definitely recognizing that police themselves do a lot of violence, and that's even where we're coming from. That's the conversation we're having to begin with. And even like police officers are often the ones that are like in their own homes, the perpetrators of domestic violence in a lot of cases. So, you know what I mean? So anyways, I'm not sure what the answer is. And I don't know that anyone really knows. Yeah. And I could say it's heart change. I could say like, you come to know Christ and that solves problems, but like, we're even having a conversation around people that know Christ and they're super blind to these issues and they're unwilling to confront them and they're unwilling to acknowledge that they even exist. So I'm not sure, but I definitely think a smaller police presence is a starting point. And I do think like a strategy that's not so, there's a word I've been looking for. It's not even reactive, but it's like, why is violent force the way that we want to solve problems of violence? Like, I don't think that makes sense to
needs
start
a non-violent. So, I mean, if you have a violent approach to your understanding of the cross, and this is in the Christian context,
Sure.
You're going to develop a violent understanding of dealing with sin.
Yeah.
I know there's some initiatives in this city and most cities to build health. And I like the notion of holistic health. How to get there, I think, requires a dismantling of some cherished institutions. And we need imaginations to at least test. I think that might start with dreaming, shared dreams of the dreams that we have similarities in, the hopes for our neighborhoods and for our cities. And I think the church needs to be co-collaborators, not a leader of that, because most churches are not well in tune to their neighborhoods. Today, at least, the parish church is kind of lost. We need a reorientation of our understanding of sin.
Yeah.
That's a funny thing with systemic racism, especially Christians who would claim that are the same ones who would believe in original sin and that sin is systemic.
That's the only system that they believe in, though.
Yeah. So, but they haven't made the connection that if sin is systemic, that one of the expressions of that power and principality of sin can manifest itself into real systems and systems that have been in place for hundreds of years. And it's the formation of those systems and how they are enacted today, but have formed culture, our culture, and impacted generations of persons and Christians of color. It's the formation of those things that have left us in a place where we're asking and calling for justice because something is not right in the world.
For sure.
Ibram Kendi wrote a book on, and this is not precisely his own idea, but he definitely elaborates on it, that there are only two things. You're either a racist or you're an anti-racist. And so just for a moment here, I'm using the term racism in the sense of racism is power plus prejudice. Power plus prejudice. Anybody can be prejudiced, and there can be racialized prejudice, right? But you can't enact, and this goes into policy making, racist policies if you don't have power to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so POCs don't have that power. So racism, power plus prejudice. Kendi, however, threw a wrench in that a little bit for me, in that he says you're either a racist or an anti-racist, and if you're not working to dismantle racist systems, then there's no middle ground. Then you're still underneath or implicitly supporting racism. You're a racist. What are your thoughts on that divide of anti-racist to racist and nothing in between. It is ironically black and white.
Nice. I struggle with, I get the idea. It makes sense in terms of like, we are moving on. There's a current, and the current is moving towards racism. And unless you're swimming against it, like by default, you are moving in that direction.
That's a good metaphor. Is that a Deb special?
I think I've heard it in some context before. Like, you know,
I got to remember
the way
that.
things are moving.
Write
I think
that
I've actually
one down,
heard
folks.
it. I think I heard it in the evangelical space around like.
No, that's a weird place.
There's either like sin or you're like countering sin, right?
Yeah.
Like our default, our sin nature is going to make us sinful, so you got to like fight against it. So that makes sense in those terms. But I do struggle with like this super binary, like you're either for us or against us. And I was talking with Curtis about this. If you want to shout out Curtis.
DJ Kinlock. I don't know if he has anything out though.
I'm not sure.
But download his CD. He doesn't have one.
Mixtape or EP or something.
Yeah,
but he was saying like he was struggling about the idea that like because he wasn't posting on Facebook, like he wasn't being an ally, and the idea like if you don't post,
we were talking
then you're
about
not
that.
in the Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
You're
silent.
Yeah,
you're not doing anything.
Silence is
you're
complicity, and so on. And in that particular case, I say that's not true because there's so many other ways to be vocal and advocate. Like, yes, there's the Facebook warriors that are like in the comments and they're fighting for me, and I appreciate that. But like, also, I appreciate people like writing a letter to their MP and being like, "Hey, racist MP, stop it," or the people that are like protesting. Like, there's all of the different ways, and I don't think it's either or. I think it can be both and or all. In that case, like I think that's a lot of the conversation from last week was, I guess I'm dating this, was like anyone that's not talking, like I'm seeing you, like you're being silent right now, therefore you don't care. But I think people are still being anti-racist in ways that are less visible, which in a lot of ways, like what we saw in this past week was performative for a lot of people. And so I would rather you be like sincerely doing something and like not posting
quietly,
on Instagram.
Yeah, than the performance.
But the idea that like you're either racist or anti-racist in the sense that there's a default current and you're either swimming with it or you're swimming against it. That makes sense to me. But I just want people to remember like there's not just one way.
There is a lot of gray in this, but that's the tension. Is it in fact black and white? You either are or you're not, which really throws a lot of white folks under the bus. But the curious piece of this is the whole reverse racism, conversation. It's not a conversation. It's an all lives matter stupidity. Don't say that. Reverse race. However, in this anti-racism or racist spectrum, people of color can be racist.
Yes.
In this understanding, if you are not actively dismantling, even if the system says you're not quite as good as the top, you're working hard to assimilate, you are part of the problem. Now, does that make you a racist? I guess
towards your own people, if that's what we're talking about.
No, I think it would be you're upholding the systems of anti-Blackness, right? And so if you're not actively working to dismantle them, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's an indictment to everyone, but it includes POCs. So in a sense that reverse racism, well, maybe. Now, you can't necessarily enact racist policies as a POC with ease, but what you can certainly do is uphold them.
Yeah, and align with those that are doing that. Yeah, for sure.
And are you a racist?
I'm going to say by association.
Yeah,
if nothing
but not
else.
quite. You don't have the keys to the car. You're not driving, but you're in the back seat.
But you're part of,
and you're going away to the destination.
Along for the ride. I don't know if you saw Terry Cruz's controversy last week around saying like, if we are trying to be anti-racist without including white people, then we're just enacting. If we're trying to dismantle white supremacy without white people, then we're being black supremacists.
We're just going to get black supremacy.
And so many people were graciously in his comments like, delete this.
Yeah. What happened to Terry?
But it's because he doesn't understand that power and privilege piece. He's also, I should say, like a black Christian that a lot of like white Christians like.
So he's
I think part of his base is unfortunately like, I don't know if he listens to them or if he just has that perspective or there's a lot there. But when he said that, I was like, I'm not surprised because of your like, I don't know his politics, but definitely your
there's
religious
no
aligning. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. And there's no one black voice, right? It's not the all black people smoke in the upstairs bathroom. right?
Yeah,
So I mean,
Tim from junior high.
there's a rich history when it comes to lament and how to deal with the loss of we in Black and brown theology that we need to look to, because white church doesn't have it. There's no way that white church has any capacity to understand lament in the sense of a corporate sin or corporate loss, because there's then nothing to lament about corporately, right? And if you're at the top of the food chain, and if your privilege has pushed you to a place where you think that even an all lives matter, or a Black lives matter rather, is oppressive, my word.
Yeah.
Lamentation escapes you. You have no sense of corporate sins, yet your Black and brown brothers and sisters are crying out for deliverance and liberation. And the key thing is our liberation is tied. We all got to get out of this whole white supremacy thing that seeks less of us. All those systems.
I heard a stat, and it was in the American context, but it was something to the effect of like, I'm not going to get it quite right, but out of 100 friends, a white person will have like one of each of like a Black, Hispanic, Asian, and so on.
It's 95%.
Yeah, but then a Black person will have like 10 white friends and like this many Asian and this many Hispanic. I think actually the Black and Asian communities in the U.S. are a bit not at odds, but like they have less sort of mingling, I should say.
But white Protestants actually have the least diverse friendship networks.
Yeah, but it was something to the extent of like, even just in that small example, like a Black person will have like 10 times as many people that don't look like them or that are different than them than like their white counterpart.
Yeah. 10 times of 3 is,
right.
But it's still something.
But that nuances like your understanding of the other, and then there's even the whole sociological theory around like the outsider within, when you're a minority and you have a better understing of like the majority population than they would ever have of you, and you kind of are able to see your culture and theirs. So I think let's go less systemic in this, because that's what the thing that comes to my mind is just like reach across the aisle, whether it's political or like racial, or even like go to another neighborhood. Maybe go for a stroll somewhere else and like meet people that are in a different socioeconomic like strata. Like I don't know, but I think there's definitely value to like being able to meet people that are outside of your echo chamber.
Even churches are segregated, which is the problem. Divided by Faith by Michael Emerson is where you would pull out some of the data from what I just said on the white Protestants, which is probably about 20, 25 years old now. But he's repeated some of that data before. Any parting thoughts? Thanks so much.
Yeah, this was fun. Parting thoughts. I had something jumped in my brain. It's now gone.
Racism, anti-racism, nothing in between.
Yeah, I think
prejudice.
like a really key thing that I've been aware of in this last couple of weeks is that people don't have an understanding of our history in Canada in particular. We're even a little bit more attuned,
white supremacy,
maybe on average, but like to the U.S. history, and then that's like our perfect
slavery.
We just sort of like clean our hands, like we didn't have that, so therefore, and yet we
did have. Tell us about that.
We did have a history of slavery.
Tell us.
Yeah, and I got into an argument this week. Twitter is great.
No, it's not. It's cancer.
With this dude. So I won't give the whole backstory. The point was, he was trying to tell me that slavery didn't exist in Canada, that we were the only country that didn't have it.
Stupid statement.
And so I pointed him to an article, it's peer reviewed, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, well, even this fraudulent article says that.
Actually, an article, not from the Post.
Like this is actually peer reviewed, and it's a scholar and academic and so on. But he's like, even your fraudulent article shows that alleged slavery ended in 1834, and Canada was actually Britain back then, therefore like Canada didn't have slaves. It was the argument. And I was like, okay, so because like something happened prior to the country like naming itself arbitrarily at some point when it decided to in 1867,
clean slate,
that means that we're clean. Like amazing. Nigeria was never colonized because it wasn't Nigeria at the time. It was just,
you guys are doing like, so well too.
It was so interesting to me. I was like, what a weird argument. So so there's a lack of history.
Mental
and
gymnastics.
Then even when people do get, the facts, they're not willing to, I guess, like accept them. So anyways, I think something important to do, and all of us should do this, is just do more reading and listen to voices that are within communities that we want to support. Like I've done this with the Indigenous community, I guess the Indigenous communities across Canada, just on my own reading. I didn't have to like call someone and like ask them to explain to me the racist incidents that they've experienced in this country, or like how they feel like intergenerational trauma from residential schools has affected them. It's like, no, let me go out of my way to find this information without like asking someone to like share their trauma with me.
Yeah.
I think that's really key. And I think in the church and outside of the church, there's value there. And then I think for Christians in particular, I think there's a lot of value to challenging yourself to read like liberation theology and theologies
but
that
black
aren't,
people make that.
Yeah, but like
and brown
not
theologians.
Just like the white theologians, especially because like who in the Bible was white, first of all?
Maybe the Roman centurion.
I guess.
Maybe.
It's just the reality that like there's
Jesus.
There's actual, it doesn't have to be a pagan idea because it didn't come from a white Christian.
Yeah, that's the formation of white supremacy is a white Eurocentric thinking. Yeah, you're right. There's so many resources out there, and I encourage everyone to reach out. We'll have some of those pieces. I mean, Cypher Church in a small way is a church formed around resistance around white European thinking, but we all share in that formation as well and can't escape it. So there's a tension, and it's a good one, but we need to navigate it and continue forward in some way while we linger in the pain. So thanks, Deb. Thanks so much. I think we covered a lot. It's we don't make public policy cool.
Oh, it's so cool.
But you make it cool. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And maybe we'll do it again sometime to figure out where we have reached with all these dreams that we had.